Bible space-time.
Global warming will soon be over and that will create a food crisis. An epidemic like malaria will spread to the many parts of the world. The European Union will be in great turmoil and the last two kings of the South, North Korea and China, will fall. The ships of Kittim will appear just before the fall of China's communism. And the king of the North will take away the daily sacrifice and place the abomination that makes desolate. All of this will happen in a few years because we are currently living in the time of Daniel chapter 11 verse 22. This Bible prophecy study will explain in detail why we are living at this time. To understand this subject better, please watch the following Bible space-time videos. The Kings of the North and South, the Seven Seals and the Seven Trumpets, the Secrete of Revelation chapter 13 and 17, and the secret structure of Daniel's prophecy.
The Bible suggests that the prophecy will be repeated.
From the Bible Space-Time video, The Seven Seals and the Seven Trumpets, we found out that the structures of the seventh events of the seven churches, the seven seals, and the seven trumpets, include a hint that these prophecies will be repeated. If so, then from when will these be repeated? The beast that John saw in Revelation chapter 13 was a leopard, and the same beast appeared again in chapter 17, and it was in a wilderness. Leopard represents the Greek Empire, and the wilderness represents undeveloped area, so the time that this prophecy is focusing from is the last stage of the Greek Empire. But it is said that the beast was in a wilderness, even though the Greek Empire had highly developed Hellenistic culture, so we can see that this prophecy was being explained from the viewpoint of the Roman Empire, the time that John was living. But because John was living in the time of Roman Empire, the angel could explain the prophecy starting from the time, but John was redirected to the time of the last stage of the Greek Empire. Therefore we can see that the Bible is clearly pointing the time, the end of the Greek Empire, as the time that the prophecy will be repeated from.
Daniel chapter 11 verse 2.
In the Daniel chapter 11 video, we have learned that Napoleon Bonaparte was the last king of the North. So the repetition of chapter 11 should start from the time after him. And as I explained above, the suggested repeating point by Revelation chapter 13 and 17 is the last stage of the Greek Empire. But Daniel chapter 11 starts from the time of the Persian Empire, so when it repeats, the Persian Empire should represent the Napoleon Bonaparte's era. According to Daniel chapter 11 verse 2, 4 kings will rise in Persia, which means there will be 4 kings after Napoleon Bonaparte. The 4 kings after him were Louis XVIII, Charles X, Louis Philip I, and Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the Napoleon III. The 4th king, the Napoleon III, was crowned as the French emperor in 1852 and remained in power until 1870. At this time, rapid industrialization, urbanization and economic revival took place, as the Bible predicted. And as the 4th king of the Persia invaded Greece, Napoleon III invaded Prussia, so we can see that the Grecia mentioned in verse 2 should refer to Germany in our time.
Daniel chapter 11 verse 3 and 4. Since the 4th king, Napoleon III, invaded Prussia, which is Germany, the Greek Empire should also represent Germany. And as Alexander's Greek Empire was divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, Germany should be divided into 4 divisions, and that actually happened as the result of the Second World War. There have been 2 German conquests in history, World War I and World War II. Just like how Alexander's father, Philip II, was assassinated in the middle of the war with the Persian Empire. The World War I ended when German Emperor Wilhelm II gave up his throne and fled to Netherlands, without a real winner or loser. When Alexander's father was assassinated, his son Alexander continued the conquest until he died in Babylon, and his empire was divided into 4 regions. This history was repeated in Hitler's Germany. Between 1941 and 1942, during the Second World War, Germany had occupied most of Europe, but it was divided into 4 regions at the end of the war, just like Alexander's Greek Empire. After the Potsdam Summit, Germany's northwest was occupied by Britain, the southwest by France, the south by the United States, and the east by Soviet Union. And Berlin, the capital city of Germany, was also divided into 4 regions.
The 70-year prophecy and the restoration of Jerusalem.
The Daniel's 70-year prophecy predicted that, not long before Alexander was born, Jerusalem would be rebuilt and become an autonomous district. This 70-year started from the year Daniel was taken into exile, and ended on the first decree to rebuild Jerusalem. The decree was to rebuild Jerusalem city as a province of Persia, not as an independent country. Therefore we cannot reapply this 70-year to our time, and this prophecy has nothing to do with the year 1948, when Israel became independent. This prophecy has fulfilled again when the reconstruction of Jewish state in Palestine was allowed, just before the start of the World War II, as it had happened just before Alexander was born. On November 2, 1917, Arthur James Balfour, a British foreign minister, sent a letter to the Jewish financial conglomerate, Baron Rothschild, announcing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, then an Ottoman region with a minority Jewish population. And in 1926, Britain declared Judea as the sovereign state of the British Empire. So the re-fulfillment of the 70th prophecy should be the Second Balfour Declaration in 1926.
Prophetic times do not repeat.
There are two types of prophetic time in the Bible prophecy. The time, earthly events will happen, and the time, the heavenly events will happen. As it was explained in Daniel chapter 11 video, the 1290 years of prophetic period refer to the time between the year 508 and 1798. From the conversion of King Clovis to the Catholic Church, to the end of the 1260 years of persecution, and the 1260 years of prophetic time was calculated from the year 538, the siege of Rome, to 1798, when the Pope was captured by French Revolutionary Army. These prophetic times are just simple results of time calculation, between two foreseen earthly events, which are not pre-planned by God. But there are prophetic times that God planned to happen on certain time. The 2300-year prophecy and the events related to the crucifixion of Jesus belong to this type of event. God planned to act something important on these pre-decided times. That is why all the prophecies of Daniel and the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets of Revelation are all arriving to this time point, and all other prophetic times of earthly events are calculated from and to 1844. Therefore, without a pre-planned time reference point, such as the end of 2300-year prophecy, it is impossible to retrieve time of other earthly events. The 2300-year prophecy ended on the time that the time of the most holy place started in heaven, as it is said, in Daniel chapter 8 verse 14. And he said unto me, unto 2300 days. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. There are 2 sections in the sanctuary, holy place and the most holy place. So if there is another reference point, it should be the end time of the works of the most holy place, which will be the end time of the world, the time of the Jesus' second coming. But the Bible clearly said that nobody will know the time. Therefore it is clear that God didn't give us the reference time, and so, these prophetic times will not repeat.
Daniel chapter 11 verse 5. After Alexander died, the Greek Empire was largely divided into 4 regions that administrated as independent states. Revelation chapter 13 and 17 emphasize the independency of these regions by counting them equally as one of the 7 heads. So it is also important to treat the King of the South and the King of the North as independent countries. After World War II, the German Empire was divided into 4 regions, like the Greek Empire, and among those 4 countries, the United States and the Soviet Union were the strongest. France and Britain were among the 4 countries, but they were the ones who received the biggest aid by the Marshall Plan. And later, United Kingdom withdrew from Greece and Turkey because of economic difficulties, so the United States took control of them, and eventually it led the US and Soviet Union to start the Cold War. Therefore it is clear that the King of the North and the King of the South, appearing from Daniel chapter 11 verse 5, are the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And the fact that Turkey was under the influence of the United States and Egypt was under the Soviet Union also proves that these 2 countries are the northern and the southern kings. And as it is said, the United States, the King of the North, was stronger than the Soviet Union.
Symbol or real? Some believe that the prophecy that has fulfilled in the past should be interpreted symbolically, and the ones that will be fulfilled in the future should be interpreted realistically. But this idea is wrong. All the prophecies are given to be fulfilled in the future from the time they were given. and we must carefully distinguish between symbolic and real names that used in prophecy. The terms King of the South or North sound like symbolic names, and Medo, Persia, Grecia, Edom, Moab, Ammon, Egypt, Libyans, and Ethiopians sound like real names, and sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, like how Daniel chapter 11 verse 8 used the real name Egypt to talk about the King of South. But that does not mean that the symbolic names always work symbolically, and the real names always work realistically. The term, the King of the South, sounds like it is a symbolic term, but interestingly it was used realistically to point the direction where the king is from the viewpoint of the King of the North. And the name, Egypt, is a real name of a country, but it was sometimes used symbolically, as it is used in Revelation chapter 11 verse 8. The purpose of using this mixed expression, symbolic and real, are not to confuse us, but rather to give us better and clear checkpoints we need to follow to find the hidden meanings of the prophecy.
Daniel chapter 11 explains the beast of Revelation chapter 13 and 17. The beast in Revelation chapter 13 verse 1 and 2 was like unto a leopard, that symbolizes the Greek Empire, and his feet were as the feet of bear, that refers to the Persian Empire, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, that represents the Babylonian Empire. And it had 7 heads, which is the sum of the heads of the first 3 beasts. So the times of both Daniel chapter 11 verse 5 and the beast of Revelation chapter 13 and 17 must be same. Therefore, the prophecy of Daniel chapter 11 was given to explain who the beast of Revelation chapter 13 and 17 is, and what it is going to do in the future.
Daniel chapter 11 verse 6. What does the marriage alliance represent? Daniel chapter 11 verse 6 talked about the marriage alliance between the southern and northern kings. Marriage alliance was often used in ancient times, because they could have the royal family as hostage. But without the monarchy, in modern society, it becomes meaningless to form a marriage alliance between 2 countries. So the meaning of the marriage alliance between the US and the Soviet Union, at the time of the Cold War, is mixing the basic principles of each political beliefs, the capitalism of the North and the communism of the South.
When is the end of years?
If we try to apply the process how the Greek Empire was divided into 4 regions, into the separation of Germany as it is, we can create confusions, because the Bible didn't specify exact time and methods when and how it will be divided.
The Alexander's Greek Empire was divided by internal forces, his generals. But Germany was divided by external forces, and this difference makes different starting points when the end of years was started. If it was divided by the internal forces as the Greek Empire was, then the end of years could be counted from the time that it was divided. But Germany was divided by external forces, so the end of the years must be counted from the time the external forces were formed. Therefore, some years after these external forces have formed, the southern and the northern kings will meet to have a marriage alliance between 2 different political beliefs, capitalism and communism. That was Yalta and Potsdam conferences.
But the Bible said, "She shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times." Roosevelt, who formed an alliance with the Soviet Union, died soon after these conferences, and the Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech and the Truman Doctrine, which was actually against the agreement of the Yalta Conference, triggered to start the Cold War. The agreement didn't retain the power and was given up.
Daniel chapter 11 verse 7 and 8. Since the marriage alliance symbolized the alliance between democracy and communism, the king's daughter symbolizes the ideology of communism. And the one out of a branch of her roots refers to the Soviet Communist Party. Soon after the Truman Doctrine was announced, Stalin, in 1948, communized the Czech Republic, the only democratic government in the Soviet Union at that time. And he also prepared the Molotov Plan to prevent those satellite countries in Eastern and Central Europe from converting to capitalism through receiving the Marshall Plan. And when Josip Tito of Yugoslavia decided to come out from the Comintern, the Soviet Union started to prohibit the autonomy of the satellite countries and to force them to follow the Soviet way of communization. So, in 1948, when the Gomulka of Poland opposed the establishment of a Soviet-style communism and supported the politics of Tito of Yugoslavia, Stalin removed him from his office and arrested him. In Hungary, in 1948, the Communist Party took control of the government, and the leaders of the anti-communist parties were exiled to Siberia and elsewhere. So, as the United States stepped back and reneged on what was promised at the Yalta and Potsdam conferences, Stalin increased its influence by establishing stronger Iron Curtain on Eastern Europe, as it was predicted. Daniel chapter 11 verse 9.
King James Version translated Daniel chapter 11 verse 9 as, "So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land." And New International Version and most other Bible translations translated this verse exactly opposite. Then the king of the north will invade the realm of the king of the south but will retreat to his own country. So it seems like it is impossible to interpret this verse correctly. But this confusion is actually helping us to understand what this is about, because there was an event that both of these contrasting translations could be applied for the same result. This event is the Berlin blockade. The Berlin blockade was started by Soviet, the king of the south, as the King James Version translated, but the result was the opposite. It was not in his favor. The blockade also helped to unify German politicians in these zones in support of the creation of a West German state. The blockade also increased the perception among many Europeans that the Soviets posed a danger, helping to prompt the entry into NATO, and animosities between Germans and the Western allies were greatly reduced by the airlift, with the former enemies recognizing common interests, shared values and mutual respect. The Soviets refused to return to the Allied Control Council in Berlin, rendering the four-power occupation authority set up at the Potsdam Conference useless. So the Berlin airlift was not just merely a defensive act. It was a successful offensive act that gave more benefits to the Western allies. That's why the other Bible translations describe this event as the offensive act of the King of the North.
Daniel chapter 11 verses 10 to 11. With the help of the CIA, in the Italian elections, on April 18, 1948, the Democrats could defeat the Communist Party. And that gave the CIA the confidence that they could also take down a country in this way. So when NATO conference was held in Washington on September 6, 1949, they decided to start a counter-revolutionary movement in Albania, a satellite country of the Soviet Union. So they sent many armed spies, as the Bible said, "He shall set forth a great multitude." But it was not successful, as the Bible predicted. "The multitude shall be given into his hand." The Soviet knew about this operation in advance, and more than 300 Western spies were killed or arrested. Daniel chapter 11 verse 12.
This prophecy is about Stalin persecuting the Jews. Stalin managed to arrest hundreds of American spies, but spies were continuing to penetrate all over the Soviet Union. And around this time, in 1948, with the help of the Soviet Union, Israel became independent. But after achieving the independence, Israel abandoned the Soviet Union and became a part of the Western allies. Despite Stalin's willingness to support Israel early on, various historians suppose that anti-Semitism in the late 1940s and early 1950s was motivated by Stalin's possible perception of Jews as a potential fifth column, in light of a pro-Western Israel in the Middle East. On January 13, 1953, the Soviet Union's TASS information agency announced the unmasking of a conspiracy of so-called dictators poisoners who had covertly attempted to decapitate the Soviet leadership. The alleged conspirators were accused of acting on behalf of both the American and British intelligence services and an anti-Soviet international Jewish bourgeois nationalist organization. Like this, as the Bible predicted, Stalin persecuted many 10,000s, but he was not be strengthened by it. When he died on March 5, 1953, no doctors was with him.
Daniel chapter 11 verses 13 to 16. After certain years indicates that these events will occur years after the previous event. In the first historical application of chapter 11, this prophecy is about Julius Caesar, and after this events the king of the south was not mentioned for a while. So what the above passage indicates is the events that will appear at the end of the Cold War during the time of President Ronald Reagan. And as it is said, in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. At the end of the Cold War, many joined the work with the United States, such as Radio Free Europe, to fight with the Soviet Union. And it is said, also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision. Historically, this event pointed to the emergence of the Roman Empire, but in modern history, it suggests that the Pope will take part in the fall of the Soviet Union. President Reagan signed a secret order in May 1982 that authorized an array of economic, diplomatic and covert measures to destabilize the government of Poland and begin to break the Soviet Union's dominance of Eastern Europe. It is said that 3 weeks after signing the directive, President Reagan met for nearly an hour at the Vatican with the Polish-born Pope John Paul I, and the two men agreed to cooperate. Reagan said, "We both felt that a great mistake had been made at Yalta, and something should be done." Time magazine reported this on a cover story titled Holy Alliance: How Reagan and the Pope Conspired to Assist Poland's Solidarity Movement and Hasten the Demise of Communism. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mound, and take the most fenced cities. Building up a mound means building a fortress around a castle before the siege begins. President Reagan began the Strategic Defense Initiative (SDI) to put military pressure on the Soviet Union. And along with other Western allies, economic sanctions were imposed against the Soviet Union, including oil price manipulation, which resulted in severe economic stagnation. Because of the siege, the satellite states of the Soviet Union began to assert nationalism against the Soviet Union. In 1989, democracy took place in Poland, the Berlin Wall collapsed, the Communist Party was neutralized in Czechoslovakia, and democratic movement started in Hungary. The Soviet Union was powerless to resist. Even the best troops did not have the strength to stand.
On December 2, 1989, the Soviet Union and the U.S. government declared the end of the Cold War at the Malta Summit. It was in 1991 when Soviet communism was completely collapsed, but because, as I explained it in the Daniel chapter 11 video, the Bible sees the beginning of the end as the completion of the fall, 1989 should be treated as the end of the Cold War, and this work should be seen as the achievement of President Reagan.
Verse 16 said, "But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land which by his hand shall be consumed."
When United States President Trump called Jerusalem the capital of Israel, some people believe that it is the accomplishment of the 70-year prophecy, but the 70-year was from the time of the collapse of Jerusalem to the first decree to reconstruct Jerusalem, not to the completion of the reconstruction of Jerusalem, and also the decree was to put Jerusalem as a province of the Persian Empire, not a capital city of independent Israel. However, President Trump's strong pro-Israeli policy, like Reagan's, has completely changed the situation in the Middle East. Reagan's pro-Israeli policy won him over 40% of the Jewish vote as a Republican candidate, and in 1980, the Prime Minister of Israel declared Reagan's government as the strongest pro-Israeli government in history. Reagan also supported Jews living in the Soviet Union by attacking the detention of Jewish dissidents and anti-Semitic immigration policies.
Daniel chapter 11 verses 17 to 19. It was not just the external economic sanctions and military pressures that made the Soviet communism collapsed. There was also an internal factor. Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, came to power in 1985 with a vision of reform. His plan for the future was led by two ideas, perestroika and glasnost. Under Gorbachev's plan for perestroika, the Soviet Union would begin to move towards a hybrid communist capitalist system, much like modern China. Gorbachev's glasnost plan gave the Soviet people a voice they were free to express. Gorbachev's reforms did more to hasten the fall of the Soviet Union.
Perestroika and glasnost are good examples how Gorbachev was trying to modify the Soviet communism away from the Marxist ideology that Lenin and Stalin had pursued. So we can see that these two policies are the good example, how the king of the south made alliance with the king of the north, by giving him the daughter of women corrupting her.
But it is said, "She shall not stand on his side neither be for him." The Reagan administration spent a huge budget on the Strategic Defense Initiative and made a huge loss on the government's budget to end the Cold War. So, in 1989, when the Bush administration took office, the United States has entered an economic depression, which led to President Bush losing the election to Clinton after the first term.
Then he will turn his attention to the coastlands and will take many of them. Daniel chapter 11 verse 18.
By the end of the Cold War, in 1989, after the fall of East Germany, the Republic of the Baltic Sea, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania began to pursue independence from the Soviet Union. And in 1991, they achieved the independence. But, because the Bible sees the beginning of an event as the completion of the event, the year 1989 should be treated as the time of the fulfillment of this prophecy. Since the United States has chosen not to oppose putting them under the rule of the Soviet Union, regardless of their role at the Yalta Conference, re-establishing the independence of the three nations was important in the process of reversing the unfair agreements made at the Yalta Conference. And it is said, "He shall stumble and fall, and not be found," in the first application of this prophecy. As I explained in the Daniel chapter 11 video, it was about the conflict between the Julius Caesar and those who oppose him, and at the end, Caesar was assassinated. In the monarchy system, assassination was frequently used to change a living king, but the regime change in modern government takes place politically, so this prophecy cannot be applied to modern times directly.
The king of the south disappears for a while.
When Rome became an empire, its territory included the regions of both the southern and northern kings, Egypt and Syria. So, the wars involving Egypt no longer appeared until the time of Napoleon, but the prophecy about the Roman Empire continued in the book of Revelation. Rome was a large empire but not a global empire. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States became the king of the entire world. So, the history of Roman Empire mentioned from verse 20 should be interpreted as the history of the world.
Daniel chapter 11 verse 20 to 22.
His successor will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendor. In a few years, however, he will be destroyed, yet not in anger or in battle. Daniel chapter 11 verse 20.
George Bush, Reagan's successor, pledged not to raise taxes on his campaign promises, but he raised taxes to meet the demands of the Democratic Party despite the Republicans' opposition to resolve more than $200 billion in deficits he inherited from the Reagan administration, so the Bible described him as a tax collector. Due to the failure of economic policy, Bush was unable to continue for the second term, and Clinton took over the office. Clinton's presidency was relatively peaceful. The Cold War ended years ago, and the economic crisis that caused by the war was about to end. But, just as the Roman Tiberius Caesar had been killed by his trusted man, Clinton was disgraced by a series of scandals, as Bible said.
And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Daniel chapter 11 verses 21 to 22.
And, the Prince of Covenant refers to Jesus Christ, so it does not apply to our time.
The prophecy about Roman Empire recorded in Daniel chapter 11 ends with the story of Tiberius Caesar. But it was not the end of the story. The prophecy concerning the Roman Empire continued in the book of Revelation with the prophecy of the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets. Watch the Bible Space-Time video about the 7 seals and 7 trumpet for more details.
Revelation chapter 6 verse 1 and 2. The next event that Daniel chapter 11 verse 23 predicted is about what the King Clovis of Frank Empire will do around the year from 476 to 508, as I explained in Daniel chapter 11 video, and that created a time gap between Tiberius and Clovis. But this gap was filled with the events of the 7 seals and 7 trumpets. Please watch my video about the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets for more details. The first seal is about the wars that the Roman Empire fought to expand its territory between the year 96 and 192, and the present-day application of the previous event of verse 22 was about the President, Clinton, so we can see that the first seal should be about the American War on Terror initiated by the next president, George W. Bush. During his time, like what the Roman Empire did, the U.S. started war aiming at the countries that were not under the sovereignty of the United States yet. United States government launched the global war on terrorism after the September 11th attacks in 2001. And October 7th of the year, the United States, supported by the United Kingdom and Canada and later by a coalition of over 40 countries including all NATO members, invaded Afghanistan. On March 30, 2003, America invaded Iraq under the conjecture that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, although, in 2004, it was reported that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. The war continued until Saddam Hussein was arrested. Like this, as Rome did after they became an empire, the United States started a conquest to widen the empire, as the Bible predicted.
Revelation chapter 6 verse 3. Obama exploited refugees from wars currently happening in Africa, Eastern Europe, Asia and the Middle East to put many countries in the economic, social and military crisis, and shake the European Union into a new world order. Eventually nationalism began to revive, and Britain left the European Union in 2016. He also has blocked industrial development in developing countries including Africa and India, using the global warming issues to prevent national growth of the countries. He also caused religious and social problems. Obama suggested the LGBT and the use of marijuana issues as if they were human rights issues, and they provoked social and religious divisions and conflicts. And that has led to the revival of the women's liberation movement, which caused the conflict about the ordination of women in the church. In the early days, conservative Christian churches were opposed to these liberal ideas. But because the government treated them as same as the racism, they couldn't oppose it openly. Even the Roman Catholic Pope didn't express any solid opinions on these issues, especially about the ordination of women as priests, until the end of Obama's presidency. The history of the world moves like a swing. Obama's policy didn't weaken the conservatism, but rather helped it to make Trump as the next president. Obama's excessive liberalism stimulated the conservative Christians to act more vigorously to restore conservative America, and that made them to believe that Trump is the one who can solve these problems. Because of these supports, Trump has been successful turning the United States into nationalism and making the country a stronger conservative state than ever before. The Obama's government had presented certain issues that the Bible clearly refers to as sin, as if it is a part of civil rights. And people who have been already living in this kind of lifestyle have tried to establish new social, religious and biblical values according to the lifestyle. These anti-Christian movements, however, have been helping to prepare the United States to become a more conservative Christian nation. Soon, to fight with these social corruption and anti-biblical activism, the conservative Christian churches will establish a mixed power of church and the state, and that will lay the road for the United States to become a Holy Roman Empire.
The prophecies that are being fulfilled now. Revelation 6 verse 5 and 6.
We are currently experiencing the global warming. Historically, there was a global warming during the Roman Empire time, from about 250 to 400, and the global warming ended suddenly around the year 300, creating rain shortage, which created an economic collapse in the Western Roman Empire, and eventually caused the fall of the empire in 476. So, according to this Bible prophecy, the global warming we are currently experiencing will end soon, and that will create a grain shortages and economic crisis.
Revelation chapter 8 verses 7 to 9. The first and the second trumpets in Revelation chapter 8 describe the wars on sea and land. The third part of the tree refers to the leaders of the nations, and the all-green grass represent the people of the nation. Currently there are war going on in Africa and the Middle East, causing many casualties. And several serious accidents and deaths have occurred in Europe as a result of migrant smuggling, both in the Mediterranean Sea, due to the capsizing of crowded and unseaworthy migrant smuggling vessels, and on European soil, due to the use of standard cargo trucks by smugglers to transport illegal migrants. The vast majority of deaths occurred while persons were being illegally smuggled across the Mediterranean and Aegean seas. The third part of the creatures which were in the sea and the third part of the ships refer to the casualty of the wars that take place in the sea.
The first 4 trumpets are about global disasters. The historic applications of the first 4 angels' trumpets were applied to the Germanic invasion of Western Rome. So, some might think that the modern application of this prophecy should be applied to a certain group of people, but, unlike the prophecies of the 5th and 6th trumpets, that included detailed descriptions about the Islamic army, the prophecies of the first 4 trumpets did not specify the target, so the first 4 trumpets should not be applied to a particular nation or country. The following picture clearly shows that the Great Migration of the Germanic tribe and the movement of European refugees are very similar. The European refugee crisis became serious in April 2015, when 5 ships carrying 2,000 refugees were wrecked, killing more than 1,200 people. The wars in the Middle East and Africa have created 60 million refugees by the end of 2014, the highest level since World War II. Religious conflicts between Islam and Christianity have been increasing as the number of Syrian refugees increased dramatically since 2011. So these first 2 trumpets are about the global chaos that has been caused by wars on the seas and on land, and by the movements of refugees.
Revelation chapter 8 verses 10 to 11. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters, because they were made bitter. The first application of this prophecy was about the malaria epidemic that broke out in Western Rome in about 450. This story was covered by the BBC News on February 17, 2011. This prophecy will soon be fulfilled again, and a water-related disease like malaria will soon spread to the world. According to Revelation chapter 8 verse 13, the first 4 trumpets and the last 3 trumpets are grouped separately. So the 4th trumpet should be related to the first 3. And because the current applications of the first 2 trumpets were applied to the European refugee crisis, the 4th trumpet should be also about the shakings that will be created by the European refugee crisis. The European Union is already in deep turmoil. The UK has left the EU, and Greece and Italy are on the verge of economic collapse, and Germany is in serious economic and social trouble. Europe's economy and security will soon be shaken, and its ongoing nationalism will spread rapidly to entire Europe.
Revelation 12 verse 14 to 17.
And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth, and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was angry with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Revelation chapter 17 verse 15 said, The waters you saw, where the prostitute sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations and languages. So, in the Bible prophecy, the water represents the places where many countries are located with many people who speak different languages. And the earth or land, the opposite of water, represent undeveloped and uninhabited places. Therefore, in this prophecy, the water represents Europe, and the earth represents America. The United States was discovered during the 1,260 years of persecution time and is symbolized by an eagle.
Revelation chapter 13.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Revelation chapter 13 verse 1.
Revelation chapter 13 mentioned 2 beasts. The first beast came out of the sea and had 10 horns and 7 heads. According to Daniel's prophecy, the 7 heads represent Babylon, Persia, 4 divisions of Greece, and Rome, and the 10 horns represent the 10 countries in medieval Europe, as they were described as 10 toes in Daniel chapter 2. And this beast persecuted God's people for 1260 years. So this beast came out from Europe and had power of both churches and states. As we have learned in Daniel 11 video, it is a papacy. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. Revelation 13 verse 11. The second beast came out of the earth that was described in chapter 12, had 2 horns like a lamb. This second beast represents the United States, and the 2 horns refer to the political powers of the Democratic and the Republican parties. This second beast will give power to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. It will also force all people to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. Economic sanction has been frequently used, as an effective way of pressuring enemies between countries. The main reason why the Soviet Union had to surrender to US in the Cold War was because of the economic sanctions. The similar tactics is being used on North Koreans to give pressure on their nuclear program. So, soon, a similar law that will completely prohibit God's people from buying or sell will be passed by the United States to yield their faith.
And the Bible discloses the identity of the beast. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. The mark of the beast, according to verse 17, is the name of the beast or the number of its name. So the mark of the beast could be generated through the numbers of the name of the beast. And verse 18 encouraged us to try to calculate the number of the beasts. And it is the number of a man. So the beast is a man, not computer code, not a place nor a country. And the man has a name that can be converted into a number, which means the name is consisted with Roman numerals. So calculating should means adding the number of the Roman numerals that making the name of this man, and the result should be 666. The book of Daniel and Revelation did not only write prophecies but also interpretations of the prophecies. As an example, in Daniel chapter 7 verse 23 to 24 said, "Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. Like this, the Bible made a clear distinction between prophecy and the interpretation of the prophecy. So we should not treat the interpretation of prophecies abstractly or symbolically. So, the name of the beast, or the number of his name, are not a symbolic description, it is the real description about the beast.
Daniel 11 verse 23 and 24.
Chronologically, the events that follow the fourth trumpet of the Revelation are those starting from Daniel 11 verse 23. The first historic application of the king in verse 23 was Franks Clovis, as I explained it in detail in the Daniel chapter 11 video. Since the next president of the United States after Obama was President Trump, this biblical prediction will be fulfilled during the Trump era. The Bible said, "And after the league made with him he shall work deceitfully." During the election time, Trump made numerous controversial remarks about race and immigration, was accused of inciting violence against protesters at his rallies, and faced multiple allegations of sexual misconduct, which he denied, but was also able to garner extensive free media coverage. And Trump won the election with the less than 10% of success rate, as the Bible predicted. "For he shall come up, and shall become strong with a small people." Hillary Clinton was ahead of all polls most of times. And most polling agencies, including CNN, predicted more than a 90% chance of Clinton winning the election. Only Los Angeles Times and University of Southern California had expected Trump to win. And the Bible said, "He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province." When Trump became president, Europe was reeling from the refugee crisis and economic problems, but the United States was enjoying a period of peace. And Trump did what his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers, as he praised his own policy toward Israel and North Korea, as what no U.S. president has ever done before. He has been pursuing a pragmatic policy of avoiding any problems that does not directly affect United States interests and security, by promoting non-interventionism. And he has been engaging in a trade war that imposes high tariffs on goods that are imported into the United States, from countries such as China and Europe, based on America First economic policies, as the Bible predicted. "He shall scatter among them the prey, and spoil, and riches." And it said that from verse 29, "He shall forecast his devices against the strongholds even for a time, until the time appointed when he shall return and come toward the south. On this appointed time, Clovis shall take away the daily sacrifice, and place the abomination that makes desolate, by converting to Roman Catholics, that will make the foundation for establishing the Holy Roman Empire. So America will continue the wars until the appointed time, and will pass a law that will convert America into Holy Roman Empire."
Who is the king of the south mentioned in verse 25? The king of the south disappeared from the time of Daniel chapter 11 verse 19 until the time of verse 25. And the Bible didn't mention anything about him in the prophecies of the first 2 seals and the first 4 trumpets. And during this time, as I explained above, America was fighting the war of terror. So we can see that these terrorists are the countries and not the king of the south. During the Roman period, Cleopatra's Egypt was in alliance with Caesar. But it was not until the time of King Augustus when Egypt officially became a part of the Roman Empire. But the Bible did not mention any wars between Egypt and Rome since the time of Caesar. Since Caesar, the Roman Empire has conquered most of Europe and the Middle East as far as England. But any of these countries have not been identified as the king of the south by the Bible. The only time that the Bible directly talked about the Islamic army was in the prophecies of the fourth and the fifth trumpets. So, we can see that the Islamic countries that the United States waged war against are not the kings of the south mentioned from verse 25. And we can also learn that the identity of the king of the south is not defined by the religion or by the location. Therefore the king of the south mentioned from verse 25 also should be the communism or communist countries, as it has been identified from the beginning of Daniel chapter 11. Currently, the communist countries are China, Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam and Laos. Among these countries, Cuba has already established diplomatic relations with the United States, and Vietnam and Laos are not hostile toward US and have been practicing open market socialism. However, North Korea and China have been creating conflicts with the US. So we can see that these two countries are the last active communist countries and the last kings of the South.
There are only two kings of the South left. According to the verse 27, the conflict between the southern king and the northern king that started from verse 25 won't be over until the time appointed. That means the time the king of the north returned to his country with great riches, mentioned in verse 28, was not the end of the conflict with the king of the south. It should be completed at the time appointed. But interestingly, the time appointed is the time that the king of the north will start to engage a war with another king of the south, as described in verse 29. At the time appointed he shall return, and come toward the south. But it shall not be as the former, or as the latter. So we can see that these two kings of the south are not the same one. And there will be two important things will occur. On the war with the second king of the south, the king of the north will retreat back to his country, without finishing the war, because of the threat from the ships from Kittim, and the first king of the south will be finally destroyed. That means, the king of the north will make alliance with the first king of the south, when he engaged the war with the second king of the south, but the first king of the south will be betrayed by the king of the north, and will be destroyed by the second king of the south.
They shall forecast devices against him. The last two kings of the south are North Korea and China. North Korea is the first king of the south and China is the second king of the south. The first king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. The king of the north will make a secret alliance with somebody from the family, a relative of the king of the south. But the plot won't succeed as the Bible said. But it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. And the king of the north will return home with great riche. So we can see that the king of the south was not destroyed at that time. That means, the one who made the secret plot with the king of the north will be punished for betraying the king of the south. We know that this event has already happened few years ago in North Korea. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's uncle, Jang Song-tak, the vice chairman of the North Korean National Defense Commission at that time, was executed in December 2013 because of his plot to change the Kim Jong-un's regime. And it was also revealed that he was in collusion with the outside forces at that time, and the assassination of Kim Jong-nam, one of the brother of Kim Jong-un, in 2017, was also related to his plot. In June 2018, the United States and North Korea met in Singapore. The US government announced that the negotiations were successful. We do not know exactly what really happened in that summit, but the Bible predicted that the US will return home with great riches, and his heart shall be against the Holy Covenant, and he shall do exploits, and return to his own land.
The ships from Kittim. The ships of Kittim was, as I explained in the Daniel 11 video, the navy of Eastern Roman Empire. Kittim is known as a city that was in Cyprus, or the name of an area in Macedonia where Alexander was born. but both of these regions were a part of the Eastern Roman Empire at that time. Then, now, which country does Kittim represent? Is it Greece or Macedonia, or the Republic of Cyprus? No, these countries do not have naval forces that can threaten the U.S. Army, so the ship of Kittim should be seen as the navy of the Eastern Roman Empire, and the Eastern Roman Empire well represents Russia. So far, in Daniel 11's prophecy, the entire world has been divided into the regions of the northern and southern kings, the United States and the Soviet Union. So the entire post-Cold War world should be viewed as a representation of the entire West and East Roman Empire, and because the ships from Kittim appeared while Clovis was engaging in the war with the king of the south, Kittim cannot be a king of the south. Which means, it is not a communist country, so the country that has a strong naval forces that can threaten the U.S. Army, and had once controlled the half of the world, like the Eastern Roman Empire, should be Russia. Russia also has inherited the tradition of the East Roman Empire, because the Eastern Orthodox Church in Constantinople was moved to Russia, after it was conquered by the Ottoman Empire. Therefore, the ship of Kittim should be the Russian Navy, and when the United States wages a war against the second king of the South, China, Russia will mobilize the Navy to temporarily alleviate the war. In that year, when the ships from Kittim will appear, the United States will pass a law that will forsake the Holy Covenant, pollute the sanctuary of strength, take away the daily sacrifice, and place the abomination that maketh desolate, and shortly after the law has been passed, the Great Tribulation written in Daniel chapter 12 will start. The tribulation that mentioned from verse 31 is the same one that written in Revelation chapter 13. After returning, because of the ships from Kittim, Clovis was baptized by the Catholic Church on December 25, 508. So we can see that the conversion of Clovis to the Catholicism from Arianism is what taking away the daily sacrifice refers to, and it was also the act of placing abomination that makes desolate, because his conversion laid the foundation for the Holy Roman Empire. So, as what Clovis did, the U.S. government will pass a law that will change the founding principle of the nation. And when the law of the mark of the beast is placed in the world, Satan will perform miracles, even making fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, to deceptively justify the necessity of the law. And he will say to them that they should make an image to the beast that had the wound by a sword and did live.
Daniel chapter 11 verses 36 to 39. After Trump, there will be a king who shall exalt himself above every god, but he will prosper till the indignation be accomplished. But the 7 plagues of Revelation chapter 16 will be poured on to the earth. And when it comes near to the great day of God Almighty, the day of Jesus' second coming, the 6th plague will come down and will prepare the war of Armageddon. The Euphrates River is located in Iraq, and it was the region where the Ottoman Empire was born. And it is also the time that the prophecies of the 5th and 6th trumpets should be fulfilled. So we can see that the war of Armageddon will be the reoccurrence of the prophecies of the 5th and the 6th trumpets. And when the war on Armageddon is about to begin, the 7th plague will come down and Christ will return.
The time of the end, in verse 40, refers to the end time of the tribulation, so the prophecies written from verse 40 to the end of the chapter 11 will not be repeated.
Therefore, we are living almost at the end of world history. Soon the global warming will end, and that will create a food crisis. Water-related diseases such as malaria will spread to the world, and European Union will be shaken greatly. The current US plan to collapse the last 2 kings of the South, North Korea and China, will be completed shortly. And the abomination that makes desolate will be set up, and the final tribulation of Daniel chapter 12 will start.